This is Jim Moser reading from The Gay Liberation Movement, Before and After Stonewall. Chapter 1, Denial and Entrapment. There was much social, legal, and medical discrimination against gay men and lesbians in the 1950s and 1960s. In reaction to those threats, gay men and lesbians established two major organizations to create safer communities for themselves in order to work toward being better accepted in society. In 1965, the United States was undergoing great changes socially and politically. President Lyndon Johnson proclaimed his vision of a great society in which education, medical care, and social welfare programs would be expanded and problems of urban and rural poverty and violence would be reduced. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 sought to end the job discrimination and segregation for Black Americans, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 tried to assure voting rights for them. These laws proposed to remove unequal treatment among blacks and whites and reduce discrimination against other nationalities or ethnic minority groups. Chapter 2, Compton's Black Cat and Stonewall. Outside of the new organizations that advocated for LGBTQ plus rights, there would be incidents that offered the chance for gays and lesbians to fight for their civil rights, and these would serve as a reminder of the fact that their freedom and well-being were always at stake. Many sources describe the riots and the police response to the resistance they faced. Newspapers published at the time also shed some light on the Stonewall riots in particular, although they were usually unaccepting of queer identities. If anything, hostile sources at least serve as corroboration that some significant event took place. The Compton's Cafeteria riot and the Black Cat Tavern. LGBTQ people caught up in raids did not always run and hide. The locals who frequented Gene Compton's Cafeteria on Turk and Taylor Streets in San Francisco's seedy Tenderloin district were street kids, hustlers, drag queens, and others considered undesirable by mainstream society. One late August night in 1966, at Gene Compton's Cafeteria, those customers met the usual police cleanup with defiance. It was stated it all started to go down when a drag queen threw coffee at an officer. Chapter 3, After Stonewall. In the immediate aftermath of the Stonewall riots, a rally and march were organized by New York City gay men and lesbians to keep the spirit of the riots alive. New organizations emerged, secular and religious, as well as an annual Stonewall riot commemorating march in New York City and Los Angeles. Meeting hate head on. A flyer handed out shortly after the riots by the members of Craig Rodwell's Homophile Youth Movement in Neighborhoods, HIM, diagnosed the reason why the police had targeted the Stonewall Inn. The nights of Friday, June 27th, 1969, and Saturday, June 28th, 1969, will go down in history as the first time that thousands of homosexual men and women went out into the streets to protest the intolerable situation which has existed in New York City for many years, namely the mafia control of this city's gay bars in collusion with certain elements in the police department of the city of New York. The demonstrations were triggered by a police raid on the Stonewall Inn. Chapter 4. Misogyny causes organizations to restructure. There was much disunity and dissension within the LGBTQ plus community in the 1970s. This was clear from the changing makeup of the organization landscape, as some groups didn't survive the conflict. Further, while natural allies in some respects, gay men, lesbians, and transgender people had and still have different experiences and different needs. Each group began to organize around its own needs and experiences while also being part of a larger liberation movement. Gay Activist Alliance and its ZAPs. One characteristic of the organizing process in the 1970s was that people differed with each other about strategies and goals for achieving gay liberation. The formation of splinter groups was a constant pattern. These organizations were democratic and consensus-driven, but because there were opinions among them, they were not particularly long-lived. Chapter 5. Creating spaces and changing institutions. While lesbians were liberating themselves from misogyny and patriarchy, transgender women and effeminate gay men also began to organize separately. They had to because lesbians and non-effeminate men discriminated against them. It was on the backdrop of these attempts at organizing that the LGBTQ plus community succeeded in a massive institutional undertaking. Anti-trans attitudes among gay men and lesbians. The wider gay liberation movement often looked down upon effeminate gay, street hustlers, drag queens, and transvestites. Many lesbians did not like drag queens because they felt that drag performance, both commercial and informal, mocked the very real difficulty faced by women who sought to escape the rigid gender roles in clothes, shoes, manners, and duties that men had historically created for women. High heels, damaged feet, makeup marred skin, and being limited to household duties demeaned them, but men considered women to be at a disadvantage when they didn't fit into that mold. The end of an era. In the midst of backlash throughout this era, there were also gay and lesbian politicians. They would not only win office, but they would also make significant contributions to progress in and out of office. The National March on Washington would serve as a depiction of the culmination of the new, undeniable status of gay politics and as a symbol of all that had been gained in the aftermath of Stonewall. Elaine Noble's accomplishments and failures. One of the ways that gay men and lesbians began to fight back against anti-gay forces in society was by creating voting blocs that would elect openly gay and lesbian officials. Representation meant not only the ability to influence the government, but also gaining a better understanding of how the government ran. Timeline. 1966, Compton's cafeteria riot happens in San Francisco's Tenderloin district. 1967, the Black Cat tavern riot occurs in Los Angeles. 1969, on June 28th, the Stonewall riots begin in New York City. The Gay Liberation Front is founded on July 24th. In November, the Gay Activists Alliance is founded. In May, a group called Radical Lesbians and that concludes the interview.